Books about soccer, or football as you guys like to call it. Look, I wouldn't be a creator if I wasn't exploiting something that is currently in the cultural zeitgeist at the moment. So, I'm talking to you about some books about football. Maybe there's a political leaning to this, who knows? And, you know, you can pick them up from the description down below if you want, or get them from your local library. Let's get right into it. The first book we're talking about is Football in the Land of the Soviets. I think this is the most recent book about football I've read. I can't remember, I read a lot of books, but this book is all about how football developed in the early Soviet Union and prior to the Soviet Union, well, when it was then the Russian Empire, of course, and how it basically became part of the Soviet ethos and kind of how the politics of the Soviet Union molded how football was developed. If you don't know, the Soviet Union were a very strong football team. Unfortunately, I don't know, they never won the World Cup, even though they came very close on more than one occasion. But the way they played football was molded by the internal politics of the Soviet Union at the time. This book is really interesting. It delves very deep into it. Obviously, it does cover the history of football coming to then the Russian Empire, and how it developed then, and how over time, you know, it became a force for the working classes to come together, how the Soviets recognized how football could be used by the working classes to form solidarity. There were two different movements within football. One of them wanted to keep it more of an amateur type sport that is focused around the ethos of football as a collective team thing, and there was also the group that were like, well, actually maybe we need to develop it beyond that, and although we can use it as a collective team thing, we should also try and use it to strive for proof that the Soviet ethos and mentality is elite almost. It's a very interesting read in that case. If you are interested in the Soviet Union, if you're interested in football, if you're interested in the history of football, if for some reason like me you managed to cover all of those things, this book is a really, really good read. I think when I saw it for the first time, I was so excited to read it. I bought it almost immediately and I didn't look back. It's a very good read. I read it quite fast as well. It's not super long. It's maybe, I mean, obviously there's the notes section at the back of a non-fiction book, but it's maybe 150 pages. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a good read in my opinion. I would have liked it to go even further, but the book in itself lays out, it's about when football came to the Russian Empire to like the early Soviet Union. But I would have loved if it kept going for the entirety of the Soviet Union's history, but unfortunately it didn't. Next up is Angels with Dirty Faces by Jonathan Wilson. This book is about the history of Argentinian football. It looks like we're going to specific countries at this point. But this book by Jonathan Wilson is one of, if not my favorite book about football and the history of football. So we all know that Argentina won the last World Cup in 2022. Wow. They won in 2022, and obviously we know they have fantastic players in the past, including one Diego Maradona. But this book, like Football in the Land of the Soviets, goes into the history of football when it first came to Argentina, but it covers the entire breadth of Argentine football. In the edition I had, it went, I think, up until after the Argentinians had won the World Cup. Yes, I think I read it in around the last Euros, which was 2024. So Argentina would have won the World Cup in the edition I have read. I don't know if there have been subsequent editions since, but it talks about basically the entire history of football in Argentina and how it relates to the political history of Argentina. So even if you don't know anything about Argentinian politics, you will get like a crash course on it. I don't think it goes into supreme detail, but you know, it covers the Perons, it covers the junta, it covers the in-between period, it covers before them. It does a good job of explaining it. I don't think it gives you a really detailed history, so like I wouldn't go off after reading this book and being like, I know all about Argentinian politics. I know all about Peronist politics. I know all about the Argentinian junta's politics. Well, it's, when it comes to a junta, it's slightly easier to kind of understand and see their politics because it's very basic. It's mostly fascist. But it's very, very interesting in that case. Also, Wilson goes into great length trying to help you understand the many different iterations of the Argentinian football league, like the Clausura, Apertura, like the cities championships, the state championships, the way those break down further. I mean, I think now they've streamlined it a little bit, but it's still difficult. The politics behind why they've done it like that, why even if a team finishes at the bottom of the table, they're not necessarily getting relegated. I think that's changed now, but historically, it's a very confusing league system, or it was a very confusing league system, and Wilson does his best to explain it and also explain the politics behind it. I think he does also go into individual players. There are sections where he goes into Lionel Messi, Diego Maradona, other influential players in and from Argentina. Genuinely, I've read a couple of Wilson's books, but this is the one where I was like, this man is crazy smart. This man's like a football historian genius. It wouldn't be a video about football books if I didn't talk about The Roaring Red Front. The Roaring Red Front is a book about multiple different left-wing football clubs in and across the world. I will say, when this book was written, I think the edition I have was written prior to the current ongoing genocide in Gaza. So some of the clubs mentioned, I would maybe question their inclusion if there were another edition to come out, or at least I would have changed the obviously history continues, doesn't it? So the chapters would have grown. So it talks about many left-wing clubs, Liverpool being one, St. Pauli being one, Palestino being one, and unfortunately for at least two of the clubs I just mentioned, so Liverpool, which is a team I do support, and St. Pauli, Liverpool, this year it came out that they were the team that basically collaborated the most with Israeli corporations, which was unfortunate, and I didn't know that. I think Liverpool, the way Liverpool went about it was they didn't really do it very openly. So like Arsenal, they have sponsors on their kits from Israeli companies. They openly announce using Israeli data, things which are things that football fans are more willing to see and understand, because you want to understand how how the club's trying to recruit, whereas Liverpool were doing it, I wouldn't say, I don't know if nefarious is the right word, but more secretly going and working with corporations that aren't really in the forefront for football fans. So for me, that's really like harmed my love for a team that I, grew up supporting, a team that when I started watching football, when Liverpool were the laughing stock of the league, I was laughed at by my friends for supporting Liverpool. And for a club that, like this book talks about, is steeped in a working class, left-wing political history, particularly in the wake of the Hillingdon disaster, it is very much a shame for me to see Liverpool kind of act like that. It's really hurt my love for that team. And you go into St. Pauli, which is a left-wing German club, but like most German football clubs and like Germany as a whole, have been die-hard or extreme supporters of Israel. But getting back to the book as a whole, it does talk about how many of these clubs have left-wing roots and continue to act in a more worker-focused and class-conscious way. I mean, Palestino is one they also bring up, which is a Chilean club, which was founded by Palestinian refugees in Chile, and even to this day, they still have a very strong connection to Palestine. I follow them on all their socials, and they are continuously talking about what is happening in Palestine, in the West Bank and Gaza, and it's really good to see some clubs actually care a lot, particularly the ones that aren't in Southwest Asia. But yeah, if you're a left-wing football fan, I would pick it up. Again, my edition I think is from 2020, so I don't know if, since then they've released a new edition, which may be now including the social aspects, and especially, clubs like Liverpool have gotten bigger and bigger, particularly like the last 6 to 10 years have really exploded as large, like global brands, how that has affected their working class roots. But yeah, my edition's a little bit older. I guess as we were talking about Southwest Asia before, we'll talk about When Friday Comes, which is a book all about football across Southwest Asia, or commonly known as the Middle East. So I feel bad because I really love this book. I forgot the journalist's name, I'll put it here. He basically traveled all across, we'll use the Middle East because it's the commonly used parlance for Southwest Asia. He traveled all across the Middle East, talking to football fans, watching football, understanding football, speaking to the politics behind football. So, he goes to Palestine, he sees how difficult it is for Palestinian footballers to even just play for the national team, to get together to play, because the Israelis weren't giving them, passes like to go and train in the West Bank if they're from Gaza, and vice versa, or leave the country. My edition again is from just before the Qatar World Cup, so late 2022 was my edition. Maybe there's been one since, there probably has. I think I've seen a couple of covers in bookshops, but he talks about even Qatar, how it's basically got its way into football, the kind of ways it tried to sneak its way into improving football, how it affected it so much that FIFA had to change the rules for how players were eligible for countries. They spoke about, the migrant rights violations. He also talks about like Iraq, how the Iraqi team were, very poorly treated under the Saddam Hussein regime, and how his son treated the players, but also like the amazing scenes when they won the I think it was the Arab Cup. It might have been the Asia Cup, but I think it was the Arab Cup, and kind of the feeling it brought to Iraqis, but also how that came in the wake, I believe, of a massive earthquake. They talk about Iran, they talk about, women not being able to go to matches for a while in Iran. He talks about Egypt in particular, and how I don't know if it's still in effect, but people were banned from going to football matches because the football matches were basically used as an area for the working classes to kind of come together and talk about their distrust for the government. And when the Arab Spring in Egypt came up, many people said, collecting, coming together in the football grounds was one of the things that kind of motivated people to do these things. He covers other parts. I mean, he even goes to so-called Israel and talks about just how evil not just the teams but the fans are, how the teams and the fans, like when one team got one Arab player, how the entire team had like hardcore death threats, boycotts, because one singular Arab was signed to them and they got rid of him. How there were clubs that will go out of their way to be, hateful. I mean, we know here in at least England, when a team that was supported by people who caused riots and attacked locals in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, I believe they were playing Ajax, how the UK government tried to defend those people, how the UK government basically threw the police under the bus. And I hate the police as well, but they threw the police under the bus because they're like, oh, you're being anti-Semitic for having worries about these people who went out on the streets chanting death to Arabs, death to Arab children, openly, how you didn't want them to come to England, and how apparently that was anti-Semitic. So it covers a lot. It does cover a lot. It's an interesting read. Again, I think less speaking about class and class consciousness, kind of like the Raw and Red Front, but still a very interesting read. Okay, I went into a lot of politics there, so I'll do one very quick one that is less political. We'll go into The Mixer. This is all about the development of tactics in football, particularly in the Premier League, how outside influencers came to the Premier League and changed and molded it. My edition is old. I think my edition is around 2022, and a lot has actually changed. No, 2020. A lot has changed in football, in the Premier League itself. 2020 was kind of around the time where it was the height of Klopp and Pep and their different styles dominating the league, and how teams were adjusting to both of them. And now we've gotten to a point where Pep's style maybe has slightly fallen out of favour, and we've moved more, or well, we kind of moved backwards away, back to a very more almost traditional English style of play, with Arsenal dominating using set pieces and defence as their strongest aspects of the team. I'm sure there is an edition being written right now which goes up until and after that point in footballing history. I'm sure that will be published in time for Christmas for someone to read. But yeah, it's very interesting. It does, there is the touches of politics, how English teams and managers and players were so against the innovations coming from outside of England, particularly Europe and South America, and how actually inevitably they had to adjust and accept the fate that the influences from outside of England, showing how these teams are dominating from other parts of the world, and how it changed things. And also, how money has impacted English football and the tactics. How, the influx of money from the Premier League has basically allowed teams to experiment and grow and change tactically, because you could bring in players from Europe. There's less of, well, not anymore. I think now English teams have realised they need to focus on youth recruitment, but there was less of a focus on that. There was a focus on bringing in the players that wherever the coach wanted from abroad to come in. There have been financial regulations added to football, which has made that, maybe harder for certain teams, not every team, because some teams are owned by oil states. So, but yeah, interesting, very tactical, but also, goes into the wider history of why certain tactics developed in England. So those were some books about football. Maybe I'll title this about political football and politics. I don't know, we'll see. World Cup at the moment, I have a lot of feelings about it, particularly it being hosted primarily in the United States. Football will and has and always will be political. If anyone says to you, keep politics out of football, keep politics out of sport, they are incorrect. Sports, football, everything is inherently political, and if you choose to ignore that aspect, you are ignoring a big part of not just the history of the sport, but also how the sport operates and how the sport is even played. Politics plays a major role in how football is played globally. So, always remember everything is political. Sports and football in particular are very political. I don't know how to segue into this, so, if you like the content a lot, maybe consider becoming a member. Members get access to bonus videos, bonus content. They get access to a movie club and a book club. So you can become a member from as little as £1 a month. There are other tiers available. You can do that by clicking join down below or on my channel. But regardless, thank you for getting to this part of the video. Remember to like, subscribe, and share the video with a friend or family member. And hey, I hope you read a great book today.